Hello and welcome to the Making Characters in Conflict with the Dungeons and Dragons Alignment System event here at Right Hive 2023, where we're writing the future we need. My name is Jesse Pullman and I have the honor of introducing our presenter for this event, Andy Dibble. Andy writes from Madison, Wisconsin and works as a healthcare IT consultant. He has supported the electronic medical records of large healthcare systems in 6 countries. He holds a Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, as well as degrees in computer science, philosophy, religious studies, and Asian studies. His fiction appears in Writers of the Future, Diabolical Plots, Mysterion, Sci-Fi Journal, and others. He edited Strange Religion, speculative fiction of spirituality, belief, and practice, which won Best Anthology in the 2022 Critters Readers Poll. You can find him at andydibble.com. Hello, Andy. How are you today?
I'm good. It's been a good week.
Excellent. I will mute myself and stop my video, and you're good to go.
Share my screen. So you all should be able to see my white presentation now. So this is using the Dungeons and Dragons alignment system for creating characters and conflict in our stories. So this grid will be familiar to some of you. The first part of this presentation is primarily for those of you that aren't familiar with alignment in Dungeons and Dragons, but hopefully for the rest of you who already know this, the examples would be fun, or I'll keep you all engaged. So the idea here behind the system is that when you choose to make a character in D&D, you choose one of 9 alignments or kind of fundamental moral and philosophical kind of dispositions. And on one axis, on the horizontal axis, we have lawful versus chaotic. And this has to do with, law has to do with honors of ideas of honor and tradition, authority, your personal principles. Whereas chaos has to do with valuing your personal freedom, with adaptability, with often bucking authority and trying to do your own thing. And now on the vertical axis, we have good and evil. And good has to do primarily with helping others and being altruistic, whereas evil has to do with being selfish and valuing your own interests. Now, neutrals, they tend to focus on the quality that they aren't neutral for. If that doesn't make sense, I think it will as we actually get into the 9 alignments. Okay, so lawful good. We are in the upper left of the grid, and I have a little icon in the upper right of each slide here indicating where we are to help you keep track. These are the characters that they're both lawful and good. So they're often where we actually have like superheroes in movies often land here, but they're both lawful. They value their principles and they're good. So they try to achieve the right end and they care about others. But if doing so violates their principles, there'll be tension and they'll often regret that. The best example of this I know of is Matt Murdock, or the Daredevil a superhero from the Netflix series. And this is because he's a lawyer, that's his day job. So he actually arrests people as a vigilante, as Daredevil, and then he'll defend them in court because he's so committed to the legal system, and even criminals having their fair shake by the justice system. Okay, neutral good. These are often the kind of the typical heroes because they focus on doing good, on achieving the right end, and sometimes they'll abide by authority, sometimes they'll violate the current authority because their goal is achieving good. Gandalf in Lord of the Rings is, I think, quite a good example of this, and that's because sometimes he will operate within authority laid down by, say, the King of Rohan or the current authority in Gondor. Sometimes he goes against these authorities, all because he knows that what's important is the destruction of the ring and of Sauron. Okay, chaotic good. These are the characters they're more roguish, the rebels, but they still care about achieving the right end. They care about other people, but they value personal freedom also, both their freedom and that of others. Their methods are kind of scattered, and they care about adaptability. They do not like bureaucratic organizations. And I didn't realize this at first, but R2-D2 is actually quite a good example of this, and that's because he sneaks around, he hacks Death Star doors. He cares a lot about saving those near him, Luke or Leia, whoever. He pokes fun at C-3PO, who is a much more lawful character. Hopefully that's a new way of thinking about our favorite droid, lawful neutral. So these are the characters that focus most on law, and that's because they're neutral towards good and evil, meaning that they care about their principles, authority, structure. These are kind of the stereotypical judges and lawyers. Dwight Schrute from The Office is, I think, quite a good example of this, somewhat comical. But he's definitely a rules guy. Using the system for his own ends sometimes defending the system. But that's a lot of his identity. True neutral. Now we are in the middle of the grid. Neutral towards both axes. And these characters are sometimes the hardest to pin down. And that's because they take a few different forms. There's kind of the Garfield the cat true neutral, which is kind of just not really that motivated towards any kind of philosophical principles at all. Not terribly selfish, but just not that engaged in changing the world. There's also characters like Sheol Gorath from the Elder Scrolls game. He's kind of this god of madness, but he's just operating according to totally separate principles. He's not really on the grid, in a matter of speaking. But I think probably the most interesting character I can think of who's true neutral, at least most of the time, is Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher. And so officially, he doesn't get involved in the wars of kingdoms and wizards, all the chaos kind of broiling in the continent. He's a mercenary. He's killing monsters for money. But really, he does get involved in all this politics. And that's primarily because of his personal relationships, because of who his friends and family are. And that's something that cuts across a lot of the grid, especially the first two rows, the good and neutral. Personal relationships drive characters, almost regardless of your alignment. So chaotic neutral. These are the characters that they're still neutral between good and evil. So they focus on so-called chaos. On their personal freedom. They are the free spirits. They value their individuality and not being restrained. Achilles from the Iliad, I think, is quite a strong example of this. So this is a guy, a hero, a demigod, a great warrior, but he spends most of the Trojan War sulking in his tent. And that's because early in the war, the general over him, Agamemnon, stole a woman that he believed was his property. And because of this, Achilles spends like 9 or 10 years just sulking, not fighting a war, disobeying his people that are supposed to be over him because he values, not being restrained. It's only when, his lover and friend Patroclus is killed that he decides to fight. So again, personal relationships can cut against your alignment. Lawful evil. These characters are also interesting. They are evil. They care about their selfish ends or just some immoral ends, some evil goal, but they do it within their personal principles or within institutions, and they're tyrants. Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a strong example of this. And so he has his goal of trying to destroy half of all erase half of all living beings in the universe. And he does that in a very principled way. Once he's achieved this, he retires. He's not out for wanton destruction. He does it, in a rules-based way. Neutral evil. These are the characters that, more than anything else, they care about their own interests. They are fundamentally selfish, even narcissistic, like Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones. They are not going to cause wanton destruction. They may have allies, but only temporarily, only insofar as it serves them. So these are the characters. They're kind of a standard villain, so to speak. Chaotic evil. These are the characters that they're very selfish still, but they value their personal freedom too, and they may even value destruction. Now, someone like the Joker comes to mind, but I found him kind of, I don't know, obvious. And so when I thought more, it occurred to me that young children often fit the chaotic evil mold pretty well. And this is because their moral development is, they're still focused on their own interests, rewards and punishments, and they often cause a fair amount of destruction. So in a somewhat surprising way, young children are, at least at that point in their lives, chaotic evil. Okay, so now we've talked about what the system is. But the question kind of comes to mind, especially if you Google around a bit, is it just a gimmick? Is it just some kind of fun thing where we, pin characters to and, kind of reinterpret existing franchises? And I mean, sometimes it seems that way to me. I mean, here we have Harry Potter with lots of characters thrown about, Supernatural. We have Star Wars here, and Jar Jar Binks is chaotic evil. That seems to just be a joke. We have Batman as all 9 alignments, and this makes you worry, because if one character can be all 9 alignments, doesn't mean anything at all. And I think it can help us. I think within certain limits. And these are the main reasons. So first, I mean, when I make characters, they're often too complex. They often have too many, not a clear philosophy, too many motivations. Their goals may not be distinct enough. And choosing an alignment for your character, some clear phrase or dilemma, with an alignment, that can help you figure out their kind of core identity. The alignment system gives you that in a very clear, distinct way. Secondly, creativity for many writers, it's not, okay, I know some writers that are very strong pantsers, that they can just take, some writing prompt and go and kind of write by accretion. But many other writers, it's more of a circle, a circle, hermeneutic circle, where you have, some parts, and they start to make a whole. And then once we have that whole more, then we kind of, change our parts. And the parts inform the whole, and the whole inform the parts. And it's this kind of feedback cycle, which involves editing. But the system, in many ways, it's like a writing prompt, but it has more structure to it. It has more pieces to it. And so if you're this kind of writer, it can give you a whole to your story, your character, your conflict, more in a clearer way than just some random writing prompt you might find. Okay, themes. And this might be obvious, but the alignment system does, in a very clear way, allow us to get at themes like good versus evil, safety versus freedom, tradition versus innovation, in a way that can still give us some pretty interesting characters. Next, conflict. That oftentimes our conflict in our stories involves just misaligned interests. The protagonist wants something, the antagonist wants to stop the protagonist from having that something. But if it's just that, misaligned interest, that can be kind of flat. It can work better to have one problem and characters disagree about the way to approach that. That gives a deeper philosophical depth to our problem and our characters that can be more interesting. And the alignment system can help us with that. Last here, that a character arc can often be described as a movement from one alignment to another. And if we can't do that, the arc might seem a little tepid or not like profound enough. If that's not clear yet, I'm going to actually launch into an example talking about that process. Treebeard from Lord of the Rings, especially the Two Towers, he's an Ent. He is a so-called shepherd of the forest. He's very ancient, walking tree creature. He's slow to act. And so the hobbits, Merry and Pippin, they ask him, whose side are you on? He says, side, I am on no one's side because nobody's on my side. He defends the forest, nature and the forest, specifically the Fangorn forest. But, all these wars of men and orcs, that no one's helping him. So he feels disengaged. And Merry and Pippin want him to fight. But his attitude is that Ents can't hold back the storm. They must weather such things as we always have. So what he is in a very clear way at the beginning here, he's true neutral. He values nature, but nature is not on our grid. But along with that, he also hates orcs, these chaotic, evil orcs who value destruction. And he swats these orcs out. He stamps on them quite literally, but doesn't actively move against them. It's only when Merry and Pippin convince him to go to the south of Fangorn Forest near Isengard, where the evil wizard Saruman is set up, that he sees this destruction, this raw deforestation, and says, some of these trees were my friends. Just kind of as this like spontaneous reaction, which is a very natural thing for a true neutral character to say, because he, of course, is motivated by personal relationships. But there's something deeper going on in him, because very quickly, his actions are not those of a neutral character. He declares war against Isengard. The Ents go to war, and they undam a river at his instruction, and the water comes down and just tears through all the industry that Saruman has set up. His response here, it's not a lament. It's not even like vengeance. It's not proportional in any way to the harm that was done to him. He is trying to cause radical change in trying to overcome this evil force. So he is chaotic good. He now views nature in a rather than as this kind of stalwart, enduring force against evil that doesn't resist, it just kind of roots itself. Now he views nature as in its wild aspect, as something that can and should cause change. The contradiction between his hatred of orcs and his inaction is now resolved. So I'm hoping that example kind of helped you understand how conflict and character change can work with alignment. But now I want to turn it around, because there's a difference between interpreting an existing character, as a scholar might, and actually trying to write our own characters using these same tools. So what I'm going to launch into here is just kind of my raw creative process. I just sat down and I typed some stuff, and then I broke it into bullet points. So what I'm doing here is just one example of how you could use the alignment system, but your own approach and your own product, is going to be very different. We start by trying to dream up a protagonist and their problem. We pick an alignment, maybe at random, but doing the evil alignment can be hard because we know that evil characters aren't very likable. So we still want someone offbeat. So we can say that our protagonist is going to be an assassin. Maybe that's chaotic neutral, those roguish rebel characters. They're fun. They're free spirits. And maybe there's someone kind of like Han Solo, but thinking maybe they're even a bounty hunter. Now we ask, how did our character get that way? Maybe he was forced into serving someone with a different alignment. Someone who's evil, who's more lawful, a tyrant. Like Darth Vader, even though Han Solo didn't serve Darth Vader, but That's my thought process. Although my thought right now, though, is maybe I'm thinking too close to Star Wars. I want someone who's still philosophically different from my protagonist, and maybe lawful neutral. That's very different from our chaotic neutral character. So someone who's really by the book. Now, what by the book characters are associated with assassins, with death? Well, I think the Grim Reaper. Grim Reapers are almost always rules guys, valuing the order of life and death. So our antagonist can be the Grim Reaper, and maybe the protagonist is kind of the Grim Reaper's punk little brother. That sounds interesting, and it fits with chaotic neutral. But we have a problem, and it needs to get bigger and bigger and worse for both of our characters. So maybe there could be like some Super Reaper that the antagonist is also beholden to. Maybe we could have some kind of bureaucracy of Grim Reapers. That's interesting. No, we do have to make the protagonist be likable. That's important. But maybe not particularly good because he's chaotic neutral. At least, so he can't be good at the beginning, maybe later on. So the idea here is that he's reaping people. That's my image. There's like some natural disaster, some storm, and he likes the wild energy of the disaster. But this is the time when he's reaping, so he has to check off names off his list, and that's not much fun. He doesn't like following the rules. So there's kind of tension here. And we want our character to have a change. So he needs an ally, someone good, someone that's neutral good, someone that can set him up to cause more good in the world. And this ally knows that the disasters are out of control. They're way worse than they should be. They're killing way too many people. The natural order is actually violated in some deeper sense. So at some point here, the protagonist has to choose between reaping our ally and letting her live. And he lets her live, even though it's against the rules. And this ruffles the antagonist, who doesn't break the rules. And then I had some kind of ending thoughts here about our Super Reaper, who could be lawful evil, and using the Reaper bureaucracy as kind of a pyramid scheme. So that was my random thought process. And the idea here was that I touched on the alignments at various points. I tried to make my characters have different alignments because that all could make them have different identities. Having characters be too similar is often a way to alienate readers, I think. But another important lesson here is that I needed to draw on kind of rules of thumb other than the alignment system, that a protagonist should be likable, that problems need to get worse, that my protagonist should make a change for the better and be more proactive. These are all things that the grid won't really tell you, but are still nice things to know about writing compelling characters. And that another lesson, I guess, here is that it's, think of Treebeard. It's good, he moves from true neutral to chaotic good. And my protagonist here is going to probably move from chaotic good to neutral good. And if you can think of your character change as being a movement between alignments, it becomes more decisive. You have a goal to move your character towards. And it becomes something more profound than merely increased motivation or merely trying harder for your goal. Okay, so I've said a lot of nice things about the alignment system, and hopefully you're convinced that it's at least a nice tool to do helpful things for your story. But it's not going to solve all your problems. It has drawbacks. Like, for instance, if you are writing more realistic fiction or literary fiction, real people tend to be true neutral most of the time. We're living life, we have our day jobs, our families, our friends, We are not out there crusading or conquering kingdoms or what have you. If this is your goal to write that kind of fiction, this system may not be as helpful to you. Secondly, if you follow the alignment system here kind of slavishly, as a lawful neutral character might, our character might end up being a little flat, only appropriate for certain genres like superhero fiction. And so it can work to kind of build exceptions into your character. So someone like Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones. Earlier we said that she is neutral evil. Because she's very selfish and narcissistic. But that's not the whole story about her, because she also values her children. Sometimes maybe even to the extent of not serving her own interests. And that gives her some more depth. We find her a little more interesting. And so consider doing that kind of thing as well for your characters. It's fine. Real people, they're complex, and our characters, often should be more complex than their alignment. Another drawback is that even though the alignment system does a pretty good job of talking about kind of our moral disagreements, it doesn't discuss every kind of philosophical difference characters have. Like there are some we can make work, we can shoehorn, like tradition versus innovation. That's a kind of law versus chaotic, or being principled versus being pragmatic. But we have to kind of just ignore parts of law and chaos and focus in on these to get there. Another potentially deeper difficulty is that there are kinds of philosophy and disagreements, like optimism versus pessimism, being forgiving versus being kind of prickly or cantankerous, that aren't really on the grid at all. Or like a kind of philosophical difference between cowardice and courage, which is very common in, say, Hollywood movies. That's not on our grid either. However, that doesn't mean that we can't make our own grids. We aren't bound to these two axes we've been discussing. So I've made a grid here that leaves the good evil axis, but it swaps out lawful and chaotic for courageous and cowardly. And in my grid, Hollywood protagonists tend to move between reactive to hero, or maybe an everyman who's neutral to a hero. And the idea here is a character that's getting more proactive, more sure of themselves, more confident in their ability to cause positive change, more recognized as such by those around them. But so I guess the question arises: how can we actually use this grid though to drive that character out? And one way would be that we can have our reactive, uncertain protagonist, seeing a hero, some ally who's already causing positive change, and be motivated by them. Another possibility is that our protagonist could see someone who's not as good, like a warrior or a mercenary, who is courageous, who's putting themselves out there, but lacks the protagonist's good principles, and notice that, well, I'm good, but I should also, I can be courageous like these people that aren't good, be motivated in that sense. Another possibility is that our protagonist could compare themselves to a skulker, someone who is both evil and cowardly, kind of operating the shadows, maybe like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. And this is a character that could be embarrassed by the cowardice inside of themselves, because they see that same trait in this skulker. So there are some options for narrative possibilities using our new grid, and of course lots of other possible grids you could make here. So I hope that this discussion was helpful to you, and maybe increase your toolbox a little bit. And I'm happy to hear your questions.
All right. Once again, that was Andy Dibble, who you can find at andydibble.com. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Discord chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. Otherwise, please enjoy the rest of Right Hive 2023. Have a great day.